Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, the live video podcast where we like to take a deeper look into the movies we're watching today to have that deeper conversation. Of course, today we got a twofer for you, two kind of heavy subject films. So yeah, let's get into it. All right. Yeah. We are going to be looking at both Civil War, came out in March or April of this year, and Lee. Both films, one about Lee Miller, the war photographer, World War II war photographer, one of the first women war photographers, and a fictional movie about another war photographer named Lee, in story named after the Lee Miller of the Lee movie. And yeah, given the context, this is something Jim and I planned on doing quite some time ago, especially as a remembrance movie. Of course, the eve of just before Remembrance Day, I believe it's Memorial Day in the United States, or perhaps it's Veterans Day. But both these movies are more observational and from a woman's point of view. And we're going to be looking at some other movies over the course of the month that take different points of view than your standard Saving Private Ryan, soldiers at war kind of thing. But I wanted to say before we get into it, given the current political context, what's happening in the United States and the global impact of the recent election, Trump getting another term, I wanted to, given the political or the at times political nature of what Jim and I talk about on this channel, and certainly what I'm, let's say, engaged in, I wanted to maybe editorialize briefly, folks, but at the same time, I didn't want to be part of the recent pile-on of it's that person's fault or that group's fault, or, that sort of post-game analysis. that I think is actually part of the problem, especially given the movies we're going to be talking about today. And especially given that after that election, there were millions of people in the United States, but in Ukraine, in Gaza, who went to bed more frightened than they already were. And what can I, this middle-aged white guy, do up here in Winnipeg in solidarity? So, of course, I actually I reached out to all my internet friends, especially in the States, check in on how they're doing. But I also kind of thought about, okay, what can I be doing? I really do think that what's going on in our time is a failure of progressives of the left to educate. A couple of phrases I've been thinking about a lot lately is all models are wrong, some are useful. Of course, people who've watched the channel for a while have heard me refer to Marxist analysis and class consciousness. This does not mean I think Marxist critical theory is the perfect one. All models are wrong, but I do think it's a lot more useful than some of the folks who are like literally voting against their own self-interests or actively working against their own self-interests. That is not, and while we can be angry and upset, a lot of that is just, oh, your model of the world is really wrong. Mine ain't perfect, but boy, that's out of whack. Another thing is a line that's attributed to Mark Twain, although it seems apocryphal, is it's not what you know, it's what you know that isn't so. And I would even take that further and say, it's also what you know that you don't even know you know. And that's where film comes in. I would argue, it's why I call the channel It's Never Just a Movie, that film is part of your ongoing cultural education. And I don't mean culture, like it's the subject at school. Just like politics is a thing that's done on the news and by politicians at a government house. It's like, no, this is part of our environment. Our cultural environment is like the sea we swim in, the air we breathe. And that film, movies, television shows are part of that education. And they're either challenging our models, our worldview, or they're reinforcing it. And it's to understand whether it's challenging it or reinforcing it, what it's actually saying, I think is something where I can make a positive contribution because, towards that education component that I think is disturbingly lacking in our, let's say, political culture, the way we do politics. And I think talking about these movies is almost like custom made for that kind of discussion. So with that note, I think it's time to bring on my co-host with the most, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jim Chaboyko. Oh, wait. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just reading.
Jim, what you needed is like, why weren't you should have had a pipe in the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, hello.
You caught me reading.
Are we doing that today? How are you doing, my friend? How are you doing?
Good.
You had also a nice a way to reconnect and sort of recontextualize your life post the American election.
Yeah, right in the middle of it, busy period of time for me. And typically you just sort of put your head down and get the work done. But we had a man in Canada, First Nations leader, Justice Murray Sinclair, Manitoba, Winnipeg based, but very important on the national scene if you're watching from from another country there, and he passed away this past, I think Monday. He was 73, but he was a very important figure and sort of like the conscience figure of the nation. Not the only one, but one of them. And so there was a outside my workplace, there was a literal teepee with a sacred fire in there, and I work sometimes pretty late. So after I had left that evening, I went into the Tuesday night. I went into the teepee and you take some tobacco with your left hand. I made the other left joke from the Matrix with them. They left anyway. Threw the tobacco in the fire. Then they follow that up with a little bit of cedar, and they just keep this fire going. There's somebody out there 24 hours a day, and they had that going for about 3 days. And you walk once around the fire clockwise, and then you sit down, or you can leave, but you can sit down and just chat with everyone. And yeah, it was super positive, and I ended up staying for. I should have been going home and go to bed, but I ended up staying for about a half an hour or 45 minutes. And it was, I felt the tension lift off me while I was in there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't any one thing. It was just sitting around a campfire with a bunch of folks. I think most of them were First Nations. It was awesome. Like it was just a really nice, and it was not it wasn't a goof around because it was a memorial fire, but we were just chatting about, the world in general and things more immediate to us. And yeah, it was I came out of there a very positive attitude. I went back the second night, the next night before they took the TP down on Thursday. And yeah, I stayed with them a little bit longer, and it was great. And then somebody saw a deer right downtown. They're like, "There's a buck outside," and everybody raced out of the tent. And then they raced back in. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
no, it was no, it was, and in addition, it's very temperate here for November, so the weather helps that along. It was about 10 degrees at night, which it shouldn't be, but yeah, it was super positive. It was a very sort of a community feeling kind of thing I came back with. So yeah, very, very positive.
Very cool. Listen, Jim, I just wanted to quickly draw attention to the fact that we have our man in Kuwait City, Jelly Duck
hey.
100.
How's it going?
In
Nice.
the chat. Great to see you here, Jelly Duck.
Yeah.
Glad you could join us. Be interested if you can stick around. Of course, I think it's in the morning. He's probably off to work, but
Yeah.
maybe taking a coffee break, but he can maybe comment on some of the stuff that we'll be talking about tonight, if not now, if he can catch the rerun.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, JD.
Yeah, great to see you, man. Okay, Jim, I'm going to let's get started here. Let's get the show on the road.
Yeah.
First, want to introduce, of course, Civil War. Ostensibly about a war photographer and a reporter at the end of the Civil War, the rush to Berlin, as one of the characters describes it, trying to quietly get out of New York City to get to Washington to get that final interview, that final picture before this part of the Civil War is ended, with the President of the United States, who all suspect will be dead within a month, and they end up getting saddled, let's say, with an old man, an old hand, maybe looking for his last road trip, and a young freelancer, rookie, almost an ingenue, and their adventures as they rush to Washington, D.C. Then, of course, there is Lee. And while this woman, as you allude to with that book, Jim, actually had quite a large photography career, this film is kind of focused on one period of her life from basically 1935 to 1945. It has an interesting framing story set in the 70s, but really is sort of looking at that period near the end of her time in France as a photographer, citizen, sort of bohemian type into becoming a war photographer. And yeah, Jim, before we get into the spoiler zone, you and I already did a see it or skip it on Civil War. Why don't you give us your take on Lee? Your spoiler-free take, preferably under a minute and a half, so I can cut it.
Sure. It's pretty much, I would say that it's a straightforward biopic. You know, it's episodic like biopics are, and it's effective in some ways it's not. Spoiler free, there's a little bit of a twist at the end, but I quite appreciated seeing life for them carefree and pre-war, and then there's a bookend post-war, and that's, I think, where the heart of it lies, is that they went from one extreme to the other in fairly quick succession. But it's fairly well done, what I can tell. I've done a little bit of research before I watched it. Interesting casting, Andy Samberg as her partner in crime, as they drive around occupied Germany.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here. See it or skip it, Jim?
Oh,
you're
I would
going
say,
on and on now.
yeah, see it. See it.
Okay, Jim.
I was trying to figure out how to fill up 90 seconds.
Yeah, you did that in my 90 seconds too. Good for you.
Too much for me.
Myself, I'm a see it too. I was nervous about this. For those who saw me on Dragon Movie Guy's channel talking about this, I was like, I want to see it. I'm also nervous about it. I found it moved me a lot more than I thought it would. While at the same time, I agree with you. It's a biopic, and it has some of the weaknesses of a biopic cooked into it. I also thought, Jim, it was a movie kind of sort of swinging between two dramatic questions that it was having a hard time answering. Is it about what happened to her during war, or is it about how this woman became who she was later in life? And I think it had it shows that in the film. But of course, anything else you want to say about spoiler free about Civil War before we get into the spoiler zone?
It's been about 6 months between viewings. I think we saw it. I put down it was April 30th that we saw it. And a few things have changed in that time. And watching it again, I think I might have liked it more, but I saw it differently a little bit. I saw it as more of a, not, we happen to be along with the journalists, but I just wanted to say that I think it's about the unreadability of America right now. I'll just leave it at that. We can talk about that more later. I'm going to save my comments for later. I do find this, it remains a compelling watch, and I've watched it multiple times since. Like as soon as it came on streaming, I've watched it a couple of times, once very recently, and while I have a lot to say about it, even now it remains a compelling watch. All right, with that out of the way, folks, it is now time. That's right, it's time for the spoiler zone. Woo! Shwee!
All right, Jim. Let's start with Lee. It is the more recent film. And let's start, just from a story perspective, the movie itself. How did you feel at the end of it?
I thought it really sort of changed a little bit of its focus.
Wrong one.
Because we're in the spoiler zone, we can
spoil away.
The twist was that, there was no interview, that it was basically a man having a conversation with his mother post
Yeah.
her death, post
Yeah.
mortem, this was all sort of in his head, which wasn't
But he's
entirely
in,
surprising, but it was, I thought it was very well handled. And it was sometimes the whole relying on family as a surprise thing is a bit of a dud. But I thought it was very effective, and it sort of changed what the movie was about for me. So I think it really, it's a standard biopic, again, with
yeah.
all the biopic genre's faults and delights. But I think that was enough to sort of win me over towards the end.
Really?
I think so, yeah.
You know what? From a story perspective, I guess I had, let's say, I found the framing device.
Mhm.
Folks, if you haven't seen it, I'll describe it to you, or maybe you just need to be reminded. It starts as though Lee Miller, late in her life, probably an alcoholic, is being interviewed by a fine young man. And she is obviously an unwilling participant in this interview.
Mhm.
And then right at the change from the second to third act, you're like, oh, wait a sec, this might not be an interview, because it dips back into this interview conceit once or twice before the end, before it's, given out that it's a son interviewing his mother.
Yeah.
And I found the change like kind of lame. It was like, why couldn't it have just been, mother? Why couldn't it have been a son interrogating his mother? Why couldn't we have those emotional stakes right up front? And that's exactly it, that there's stakes, not just an interview and some bitter old lady, but emotional stakes. And then when the twist comes that she's already dead and he's really interrogating the evidence of her life, then I think that would have hit harder. I also think, and this is, I don't know about you, Jim, but there is a point in the third act where she's had a meltdown in British Vogue's offices and doing her best to destroy the negatives of the work of all the pictures she took in, especially in Germany. Like, she was at Dachau. She was like, she saw, like, some of her photography from that period is remarkable and disturbing. And we've seen her, and her witness these traumatic events, participate in some of these traumatic events. So when she's having the meltdown, I am emotionally with her. I'm as pissed as she is. And then she explains herself afterwards. And it's like this big expository dump about her past, that she suffered sexual violence, sexual assault when she was a child. And it's like, I understand that is something that happened, that there was this family friend, who molested her as a girl.
Yeah.
The way they reveal that here is, it really bugged me. First of all, it just didn't feel, it's like, well, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And it also, it's one of those weird ones, Jim, where it's like, well, I don't know. I thought we had all the justification. I'd be pissed. She's just been through all these traumatic events, her finding her friends, who've suffered far more than even she did. And that's not to take away from her suffering, the trauma she witnessed, it's all just horrific stuff. Every right to be pissed right there. So to dump this on us as a way to, like, this exposition after the fact, and it's like, I think of that Truby maxim about, hey, exposition's fine when it's used as a tool to achieve a character's desire. And it's like, no, this is just informing us afterwards. You know,
Yeah.
do you
I
know
mean,
what I
some
mean?
of it,
And so
yeah.
I found that kind of, it's still at the end of it, I'm still feeling like that's why I kind of started there. I still felt moved by this
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
It's still an interesting story and everything. And the way they told it, for the most part, I was engaged in her.
Yeah.
But that I thought, and the same with the framing device, it's like, oh, ditch something, or like they allude to it. And this is the problem with a biopic, especially when there's living relatives, is it's like, well, we got to handle this carefully. And
Yeah.
Winslet and her team around her were really keen on bringing Miller's story. So they're handling that with maybe kid gloves that in other people's hands, maybe they wouldn't have. But why not show us the terrible mother she most likely was? Because it sounds like she was an alcoholic for maybe decades.
Yeah.
You know, and her, because you even
PTS.
see a bit of her son going, I always thought I was the problem. Well, show us some of that. Like, again, coming back to the stakes of the matter, you know, he could even be describing to his own daughter, who's a part of maintaining the legacy. It's like, well, you know what? Grandma was grandma. And some flashbacks about his traumatic upbringing as as a son of an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And how, because again, coming back to what is this movie about? Is it about how trauma, goes down generations? Which is a fucking awesome subject and a great thing. Or is this about how this woman became a war photographer? Why did she go? And that's I guess I'm making it bigger than it sounds. And folks, don't get me wrong, I think this is a movie worth watching, especially on streaming. Not sure you would have felt the same way if you went and saw it in the big screen. But what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, am I talking out
some
of my
of it,
ass?
I think some of it's a bit cheaty. Like admittedly, when she says,
that's a great,
because they have a sort of a deal that, if you ask me a question, I get to ask you a question about yourself. And they establish that at the very start. So finally she calls him on it and she says, tell me about your mother. And then that's where it's revealed, and sort of like, would a mother and son talk to each other like that? But it's all in his head anyway. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what did it for me is perhaps it was the actor that played Tony, or her son, but he's got it's a very
Joshua
still
O'Connor,
scene.
I think.
Was that what it was? It was a very still scene. Yeah, they don't
Josh
credit
O'Connor,
him.
yeah.
They don't name him, in IMDb, as if to,
to maintain
keep the surprise.
Yeah.
But there's a
fiction.
scene where he looks and he's looking out the window and he looks back and there's no Lee, and it's just everything is all
her
over the
crap
floor.
around
And I
her,
thought that was that shows the subtlety that you're just sort of talking about it lacking. Like, it sort of made up for just that one shot. I thought was a really effective
nice
way.
hook. Yeah.
And had the movie had that much more subtlety throughout, I think it would have been better. But that was, I just thought that was a really great shot. And it's just like, he's obviously been there a day, all day, several days, and it's all spread out. In real life, he went up into her attic, found a box, and thought, oh my God, my mom was in the war. And I sort of think, in the millions of decisions you can make in how to portray a life, did they drop would that, because there's that sort of that discovery, like that moment of holy crap. That's always so amazing, to see on screen. They'd sometimes do it badly on police shows where someone's sort of solving a crime.
Yeah.
But that sort of realization, that moment of realization, bam, that's the shot you want. And like, literally, can you imagine just going through a box and finding like pictures of Dachau and obviously this was my mom's work, and she never mentioned it.
And her mom naked in Hitler's bathtub.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. which was nicely recreated, by the way, like down to the bowls and the way that there's a chair to the side, and holy cow, they did their work there.
Shout out to, oh geez, I can't remember the film. Spend your money on the art department, folks. It always goes on the screen. Filmmaker advice. What did you think, Jim, of, like, once we actually get into, say, the action of the piece, what did you think from when she basically, the Vogue has their marching orders, get the women into the war, get the women on side, women got to fight the home fight so the men can go off. What do you think how it handled that? Like from there to she comes home and like there to she comes home in 1945 in a great little reversal, just quick aside, where she gets out of the vehicle uniformed, all her crap, all her army bags in a uniform, while it's the husband at home looking good for his returning wife, which I thought was a nice little moment. What did you think of that period?
That was, and because I knew a little bit about her going in, and she gets back home from the war, I think at the sort of in the middle of the second act, end of the second act or something. I'm like, holy cow, there's a lot left.
Nearing the end, actually, pretty much the end
past
of the second
first
act.
hour, I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and,
well
I just
past, because it's
what else are they going to cover? And of course,
she does that.
She goes back.
She's looking for. Because she gets back, and then you see her get the Vogue, and she's looking for her pictures.
Yeah.
Like, and you're deep in the third. That's the third act piece.
Yeah.
She is what the end of the second act, I would say, really is that moment you were talking about with her son, where you're going, ooh, this may not be an interview. She has already given, what's his name, played by Andy Samberg.
David Sherman.
Yeah. David Sherman. Davey, the hug, they've had their moment. It's that great, weird, maybe that's a strong word, but weird for them. You could see it in them as they take this amazing picture in Hitler's bathtub. And then afterwards, he has his own like kind of, oh my goodness, his overwhelming moment as a Jewish, as a Jew and an American soldier discovering this with her.
In Hitler's apartment.
In Hitler's apartment. And then he's outside and he's like, and she gives him this hug, and then they drive off. The war's pretty much done. And then they cut to her saying, yeah, by then he had killed himself. The war was over. She comes home. As third act.
Yeah. No, I was there, I was there for it. It is a biopic, and they do limit the amount. Like it's not her whole. We were talking
and
before we went on about
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, she was a model. She was a fashion photographer. She
show that picture you were showing me earlier, Jim.
I'll look for it here, but they did something called solarization. Or in other places I've read, it said they rediscovered it. So I'll just, but they actually recreate this shot in the movie.
Yes.
So they did a lot of that. Let me just give me a sec. It'll be background but this is here. So it's this kind of thing.
And who did she rediscover it with?
Man Ray. The photographer Man Ray.
Ray.
Yeah. So So yeah, I mean, just she's got a full life.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is episodic, but it is fairly it's limited. It's
As a
not the entire
biopic
life.
must
Yeah,
be,
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah, how do you condense an entire life into a couple of hours? You
Yeah,
know,
and everything's got to have weight and that kind of thing. I mean, I sort of like the biopics where I guess they wouldn't be biopics then, where you have a historical figure. Wasn't Lincoln like that, where it's just like a couple of weeks of their life?
yeah,
Spielberg's Lincoln, I think, was a
like an
or the Iron
episode,
Lady or
not
something like that.
episodic, but
Yeah,
we're going to dive into this
this
episode.
one
Yeah,
particular thing. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Otherwise, it's either that or miniseries.
yes,
You know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's got its own. You have the luxury of time, but sometimes the impact isn't as strong because it's strung out a little bit. So,
and I think this is coming back to this film. Is it a film about trauma and how that's visited, or is it a film of the making of a woman war photographer? And I think they're trying to do both in this movie, and that is the coming back to the third act. Yeah, you know what? From when she really starts, Vogue has its marching orders. She's gotten a job at Vogue, notwithstanding the art directors just hating her.
yeah, yeah.
But her awesome banter with Andrea Riseborough as Audrey Withers, the at the time publisher, editor, head editor, whatever, the Poobah, Condé Nast's Poobah. From there to that moment the war ends, I am so invested. Then they get the third act, and then all of a sudden you learn this piece about her past, which totally changes the tone and the justification and why she did it. And yeah, I think that that hurts the movie, but I'm still so invested in her.
Yeah.
That I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. What the? You think about stuff later, but even at the end, I'm like, okay, still pretty cool. Pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
Poor language.
I don't know if you remember the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the novel. There's some versions, if you read the one, a man and his son go off on adventures on a motorcycle. Sometimes the man goes with a friend and they have different approaches to the motorcycle. When, the author wants to know how it works, the other one doesn't care. He just takes it to a mechanic whenever it breaks down, whatever. The son, so yeah, you read this entire book, then it ends. And there's a little epilogue, more in the more recent versions. His son that he traveled with eventually was at some sort of party when he was 19 and in university, and long story short, was stabbed to death. And sorry for the spoiler, but that changes the entire, the story you just read, instead of just becoming one man's, search for life in America or whatever, meaning all of a sudden it becomes a story about a father and a son.
Yeah.
Like in the space of about a 3-page epilogue. And that's sort of like, now that's a situation that you can't control. This is something entirely different. But when you do add that late information, it can actually sort of, affect the rest of the movie.
I just don't think it worked here.
Yeah, no. I agree with you. Yeah. I'm commenting on how weird it is when you're presented with late information, whether it's organic or not, or if it could have been incorporated a little bit early.
Well, here's the thing: I'm not even challenging its veracity.
Oh no.
No. Even it's like, that apparently happened, but it almost takes away from one of the amazing things, and this maybe more. We might have to put a pin in this, but I'll say it once now. We should get on to Civil War and then move into the meaning of it all. But one of the amazing strengths of this flick for its weaknesses, one of the things I think is it's like, unlike so many other war movies, sexual assault, which I've said before, it's not a bug, it's a feature. You know, there's other features of war, which we'll talk about when we talk about Civil War, but here it's clear. And in all its various ways it plays out, the gendered violence, the sexism, everything is front and center but because we're following a woman's experience through this, it never feels preachy, but it is there. Like, even to the point of the pictures she actually took, pictures we've all seen. Like, she wasn't the only one who took these pictures, but she was one of them, of the way the community would get back at these girls who, slept with German soldiers. And we get a little of the before story. We don't get the after, but we get enough of the before and a little compassion, a little bit of the other view that just sort of hammers home how much you start to go, you get why people reacted that way to these women.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're like, yeah, did they have a lot of options? Like, and it was a great moment, which is, they all say that, dear. Like, it's a great moment. And when she kind of pushes her way in front when they're about to do the head shaving, public shaming thing, because, women's got to be shamed publicly if possible. Oh my God. Apparently another Nick Fuentes moment. What a piece of shit. Although Jelly Duck in the comments says, a race-censored name, that's funny. Anyway, shamed. Oh, I can't even, I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah. They had to be shamed. They're leading up to
once again,
that.
Nick Fuentes, that
threw it out of your head.
Shit.
Before we move on, I just want to mention another thing too, is that whole sort of family reveal that all of a sudden, in the third act, this becomes suddenly sort of more about family, is kind of an interesting thing I've noticed in other recent war movies. I did watch just quickly Operation Mincemeat recently, which is about the leaving the dead body near where the Germans could find it with all these secrets, and to throw them off various plans. And it was kind of interesting because, it wasn't just about the mission.
No, you have a bad marriage.
What's that?
Or a marriage that is under stress.
Well, have you seen it?
I've seen part of it.
We haven't reviewed it on this channel, but
no.
In the first couple acts, it sort of comes apart. It's not a perfect movie, but it's kind of interesting.
That may be why I stopped watching it.
The first couple acts, they incorporate a lot of stuff about identity, because they all, the small team of 4, all work on creating an identity for this guy, like a backstory, and they're all heavily invested in his love life and the things he does and everything else. And that's kind of interesting. It was directed by the guy who directed Shakespeare in Love, John Madden. So I think there's a little bit of a through, because that deals with identity as well.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a through line. So it's not just this. The identity aspects of it are value added into what could be a plain old World War II story.
Yeah,
which is what they used to concentrate on, but this a little bit of a new thing, perhaps, I guess.
Well, I'm wondering if thinking the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society really have a soft spot for that flick, but it's also another one about the aftermath. A different kind of story, first of all, about the aftermath, told by a woman writer, about these civilians' experience under German occupation on the Isle of Guernsey. And yeah, I strongly recommend. It's a bit of a tearjerker. It's a melodrama. It's a romance. It ticks off a lot of my my guilty pleasure boxes.
This club's got everything.
Plus, Lily James. If I was a younger man, I'd be like,
yeah.
Anyway,
an ulterior motive.
Anyway, folks, let's move on. Let's put a pin in Lee, and let's talk about, folks. Let's talk about Civil War. We're deep in the spoiler zone now. Got a new. Oh, damn! See, don't leave just yet. I see you in the chat. One of the reasons I was excited and nervous to watch this is a conversation on. Of course, I'm on Threads as you are, Jim. Film Threads. A lot more excited than it is on that Nazis social media channel. Not that Zuckerberg's that much better, but anyway, rabid cats versus regular cats.
Pick your poison.
Anyway, but part of it was I was excited. It was interesting. See, he's in the chat right now. He's got to go to bed, but he is the reason my understanding of this film grew a little. It came up. I said, we're going to do this. He's going to say, he hasn't seen it yet. He made he said, he made just kind of an off-the-cuff comment about Hawaiian shirts. And he's like, I had to get rid of all my floral prints because the Proud Boys started wearing them as their, douchebag uniform. Part of their shtick. And it's like, oh my God, there's like a whole sequence in this movie where they're wearing that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, that changes. Talking about what we're told changes the meaning.
Yep.
I mean, anyway, so thank you very much. Thanks for for popping in, man.
Yeah.
Come back for the rerun.
You just gave us
the channel.
You just gave us an exclamation mark.
Yeah. But thanks for coming in. Understand you got to hit the hay. We always do these things ridiculously late. It is our way. But thanks for coming by, and thanks for giving us that little tidbit that will make our conversation about Civil War even that much more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This film, Jim, ostensibly, in many respects, it's a road trip movie following these two pros and this Lee Smith, apparently named after Lee Miller, and a kind of fangirl freelancer trying to break in, a bit of an ingenue, Jessie, and her mentor. And so she's ended up being stuck as an unwilling mentor to this young kid. That's what happens. You saved her life in the first scene. Well, that's on you now.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah.
You saved her life. You're responsible for her now.
That's how it worked in all the old sitcoms.
But also stuck with her mentor. Somebody probably saved her ass. So, and it seems to me at the beginning, at least, it's like, you're burning out, lady. You got 1,000-mile stare. You're having and at times it's like said in the story, this is an existential crisis. it also seems to be, though, so it is this road trip. It is about these keeners trying to get that perfect interview, that perfect picture. But it also seems to be about this woman sort of wondering what the hell she's doing. You know, why am I even here? What is the point to this? She is going through an existential crisis. She's also, I think, just, burnt out.
Yeah.
What would you, I got two questions for you, Jim.
Sure.
First of all, end of the movie, what were you feeling?
At the end of the movie?
At the end of Civil War. Yeah, what did you feel? Like, how are you feeling?
You know, just that that the ground wasn't really all that solid for these characters. Like, where do you go from here? There's a lot of dissonance in this movie, a lot of cognitive dissonance, whether it's music choices, I think purposefully. There's things like there's two characters talking, and a sign behind them there's a says Union Carbide building America. So there's all these little signs of a society that had up to some point been working, and you have to think that the last
the choice
maybe
Union Carbide.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was Union Carbide anyway, but everyone's got their little concert shirts, and I think concerts probably aren't going to be a thing anymore, like tours and things. And I was feeling that the like, where do you go from here? One side obviously won, but who are they? We're not given all that much information, which a lot of people complained about, but I don't care about that. But I just very unsure, a very unsure future when the currency of record is the Canadian dollar. So
and the hard currency, the one that makes people, real money.
We'll give you $300. We'll give you 300 Canadian.
That'll get you a sandwich, ham or cheese.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool. But so I just felt that, for they have their immediate thing, like it's always micro and macro, right? There's always the immediate thing. We got our assignment done. Where do we go from here? And I don't know that anybody in the Oval Office knew where they were going from here. So.
Interesting note on the assignment. When I will put a link to it in the description. I was listening to a great, I can't remember, the Telegraph, that right-wing rag, but a great two people who've done war correspondence talking about the film just as war correspondence on accuracy and like, just, hey, does this seem legitimate? And mostly these two guys talking about it, I know that guy, and I could imagine myself in that car, and but one of the things they did, and I'm not sure if they thought of it as a quibble or as a bigger thing, but he's like, wow, they didn't. One thing they missed was, why weren't they filing? Why weren't they forever obsessed on how they were going to file? They never talked to the desk. They're just, the writer never pulls out his laptop. That was a great comment.
Yeah.
But also counter to a lot of the other criticism of this movie from mostly critics, but a lot of people who, journalists, and it's like, wow, you seem to be digging for a reason to hate this movie. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because it's getting under your skin.
Well, a lot of people said
these two dudes were like very, maybe cookie cutter, but they seem to have more, not positive necessarily about the movie, but positive to say about its verisimilitude, its truthiness, you know. But one of the things, are they ever going to file?
Yeah. Well, Joel's a reporter. After a while, I'd like, is he? He doesn't have any cameras. What's he doing? Never writes anything down. Never really kind of talks to anyone. Doesn't even have a video, like one little video recorder or like audio, kind of like little playback
his phone
thing.
just out
Or his
there. Like,
phone.
yeah.
His phones these days, So, would have made a bit of difference. But they're
he is the one who
I've got a
asks
photographic
questions.
memory for quotes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your editor will buy that. That's the way I remember it.
Yeah.
No tape, no. Okay, let's see your notebook. Let's at least see that. Then we're not getting this. Yeah, it's not being published because you're out of your memory. Might as well be out of your ass.
The hilarious
DMG.
Don't shoot yet. I need a quote. That was actually kind of funny. But.
Yeah. Well, that was the point.
Yeah.
To get the quote. What did you think of? It does seem to be almost structured, Jim, or the way I kind of looked at it was like everything from the first act right to the end is almost like you could almost say they're lessons.
Yeah.
First lesson when Lee saves the little puppy is, you know what? Wear Kevlar, wear this vest, and pay attention. And that there's further lessons until the final lesson where she's obviously learned, which was kind of set up at the beginning. Would you have taken a picture of me if I was blown up there? What do you think? Yeah. It's like, now this one can have the dead-eyed stare of a burnout later. Yeah. She's gotten the shot of the century. She will be the new Lee. That will continue.
It goes on. Yeah.
What do you think of that? Does that jive with your memory of it? Oh, and by the way, quick shout out to DMG in the house. He's in the chat saying didn't see
Brian.
Civil War, but he did enjoy Lee. Anyway, back to you.
Okay.
Back to you.
So yeah, there's a few other things too. There's a and by the way, Brian, we're in the spoiler zone. There's a picture where Lee takes a picture of a dying Stephen Henderson, the character, the older man, and she's looking at it, and as we do with our photos, and she deletes it.
Yeah.
And then later on, there's a picture that Jesse gets of Lee in a similar situation, and she doesn't delete it. She's
film.
Yeah,
she's shooting film. We don't know what she does.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but
because they show a sequence.
Yeah, but she's shooting film. Okay. No deleting. I mean, doesn't mean you can do a Lee.
I see what you mean.
Cut, but she shoots film.
That's right too. Yeah, I should have picked up on that. But so that's kind of an interesting thing that they put in there to show the difference of the characters, where they are in life and that kind of thing. But it's kind of interesting to see how they've depicted those two characters, and what direction they're heading in. There's an interesting little bit of body language too as they're leading into that final assault on the Oval Office. Both the women are at points being dragged, although it's Joel sort of dragging Lee with him because she's breaking down, not
she's
functioning.
Finally having her meltdown.
She's finally having like what they used to call a nervous breakdown. It sounds like
panic attack.
He's dragging her, a panic attack, and Jesse is being restrained because she's going too far ahead. So the soldiers are grabbing at her out of kindness and sort of like get back here.
Alluding back to that first kind of real combat scene with the guys, maybe Proud Boys in the floral prints. Their bit of fantasy about Civil War, and they'll be the heroes of the insurrection. Where he always had his hand on her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting sequence too with the I guess it looks like it's a university that they're fighting in or some sort of complex. The choice of music is De La Soul's Say No Go, which has the samples from Hall and Oates. And it's I think it totally works. It's the weirdest choice. And I put it on Threads and somebody said, yeah, the music drops in this movie are kind of strange. But yeah, it's a kind of, because it's a happy sounding tune and they have all this sort of chaos and carnage going on behind them. And people are literally dying. And then after the battle, they show Joel and the lead Hawaiian shirt guy just sort of like, slapping each other's shoulders and saying, wow, that was amazing, and laughing about it, and sort of just like the
coming
memory
down off the high or whatever they're joking about.
Yeah.
And then
and Lee's just like
and then a war crime.
Yeah. Everyone else is shooting wounded soldiers and executing on spot and that kind of thing. But yeah, so that was sort of an interesting thing.
Why do you think Garland went with those choices, those music choices, that contrast?
Yeah, I think it gives it some contemporaneousness. It feels sort of the time, and also that despite, I mean, it's interesting. I think it just offers the contrast, and it sort of places it now. You don't have that heraldic war music.
Yeah,
it's kind of good time music.
You picked on it. Like, I don't think it's just to set it in time. It's a vibe.
Yeah.
Like, because you can pick all kinds of music for that to set it in time that would have a different vibe, a moodier vibe, a bit of a bummer or something. Because, when they're driving, there's the forest fire, may have been caused by war. It could be just a forest fire. Of course, it's not being dealt with because you're in a war zone. As they're driving through with Sammy dying, looking through the window. That music is beautiful. As they're driving through, I guess it's Pennsylvania and Virginia and maybe a bit of Maryland on
coming
their way
up around. They're avoiding Philadelphia because they were told to avoid it.
The music choices are almost got maybe not a country, a bluegrass kind of vibe at times. And, sort of contrasting sort of the beauty of the place with this beautiful music and also the horror of what's going on. But you picking a poppy, upbeat vibe. That's almost, choice.
And it's
more than setting time, I think.
And I think what it is mocking, in a way, mocking the exploits there. If I had to come up with the conclusion, I've been thinking about it, and that montage, and they do not slow motion, but they have it in that sort of slower speed of film where people are turning around or reacting to something. And it's super effective. I found it really effective.
We don't hear any exegetic or diegetic sound. It's all exegetic, or vice versa. We don't hear the machine gun going off. We don't hear what they're talking about. We don't hear any location sound. I think that would be the diegetic.
There's an interesting,
just the pop music
where where there's an interesting moment where Joel Wagner Moura is broing out with the victors, and he doesn't realize that people are being executed behind him, and he's sort of like talking, he's smiling, and then he goes, and it's all with the music, and he goes, like he hears the guns.
Yeah, he's like,
that's a kind of a neat shot.
And that's that music cue stays, right? And so I think that's kind of one of the remarkable pieces of it. What about what do you think? Okay, so there's the movie. It's a road trip trying to get this quote. That's let's say the dramatic question. But there's also the emotional question. What is it really about? And I don't mean necessarily the politics of the piece. We'll get into, but what do you think the emotional thing is? If, like, even Lee, Star Wars, let's pick on poor Star Wars again. That's pretty easy. Callow youth becomes a man. You know, callow youth grows up. It's a story of growing up. Godzilla -1, that's a story about redemption. When we think of the lead, it really is, you know, it is about Lee Smith, about Kirsten Dunst's character. What is it really about? What do you think?
Maybe less on the personal side of things for now, but what I picked up more from it this time, watching it a second time, was just the this is the anxiety and the unsuredness of things, and I'll illustrate it with a little bit of a, description. Is that they drive, nobody knows how to approach each other. Everyone grips their guns a little tightly when a new car comes in and they go to get gas at one point. And these guys they've got a couple of guys hanging alive in the car wash because they caught them looting. And he says, I knew this guy in high school, but we didn't talk much. And it's just that, and you don't know, getting into any social situation, it's almost like a zombie show, is that you
One
don't
of the
know.
critics referred to it as a zombie movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know who you're dealing with. There's not really a uniform. I mean, some guys have some people have the
And even the
gear.
uniform doesn't necessarily mean predictability.
And as you get closer to that main scene, they go through a pitch and putt or something like that. It's the one with all the Christmas stuff out.
Winter Wonderland.
And all the guys have sort of like, they've got their nails, they're in full camo and stuff, but they've got their nails painted, they've got multicolored hair. And that leads you next to the Jesse Plemons scene, where he's got the heart-shaped pink sunglasses, but, he's kind of a murderous, crazy bastard. Are those part of the same crew? So it's that unsuredness of each other. It's that suspicion. And to me, this happened to be about journalists. And that was the train we were riding into the story on. And you have to take them through America, and just nobody knows who anybody is. Like, nobody knows how to approach each other. You're almost approaching them like a potentially nasty dog or something like that. And then I got that suspicion of community, or that sort of the dissolution of community a lot more this time I watched it. So on that sort of bigger level.
Yeah. Well, let's put a pin in that, and maybe this is the time, actually, Jim. If you think of another thing, myself, I really do, I think, almost emotionally, it is about this woman kind of coming to terms with her life and kind of trying to answer that emotional question. Why am I doing this? Spoiler alert for a future thumbnail for this show. Still a work in progress. But what is... It's really about, on an emotional level, like for this character, a trying to maybe recapture something. And I'm working this out as we're chatting. It's something I noted in the See It or Skip It we did way back when, but even more now. She is in earthy tones, earthy colors. I'm talking about Lee in earthy colors until Sammy dies. Whereas Jesse is very, like, up to that point, she is always in that white t-shirt. And she looks cute. Like, I mean, cute. What a cute girl. it's got the, the fashion of our time right now, a little bit, the t-shirt tucked in the front, but it drapes out, and it, her jeans are fashionably cut off. It's almost like capris. I'm dating myself. In fact, dating my parents.
Clam diggers.
Anyway, so she's earth tones, white. I do mean ingenue in a weird way, but come Sammy's death, all of a sudden she's in white. Lee's in white. Jesse's in a green, almost an olive drab t-shirt. There's a change there. And I do believe some more story foreshadowing. She is cleaning the blood of Sammy out of the truck.
Yeah.
And what happens is she's getting blood on her white shirt, right about in the same area, Jim, where Sammy was shot.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah.
And, it's,
I noticed that. Why would you clean that in a white shirt?
But I think that's because there's this white innocence trying to recover something. I mean, right around the midpoint when they're getting shot up at the golf course, like she's already starting to tune out. They're lying down. Jesse's trying to get and she's looking at the bluebells, just tra-la-la, just having a moment of, so it's almost like this, a burnout nearing the end, and so almost like emotionally, you're wondering, how is this going to play out? And it's, is she going to get that back? And she even has the panic attack at the end of it. And it's, I think that kind of, if I look at it that way, the ending becomes more tragic for me. Because we see her at the very end, and I'm thinking of a tragedy where a character can't change. What does she do? She's having a panic attack. She could walk away.
Yeah.
But no, it's like there's this moment of like the Lee, we get to see, the dramatic question is answered in that we get to see the Lee that everyone's impressed by, the superstar, the one with the instincts. It's like, no, we're going there. Like she knows.
And she's the one that leads them.
Exactly. It's her
She
instincts.
recognizes the decoy.
Soldiers behind are like, oh, wait a second. They know something. We're going with them.
Yeah.
And she's walking off to her doom. That is her doom. That is the choice point. And of course she does die. And her trainee, her apprentice, follows in her footsteps by taking a picture of her.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, going back to those correspondence, another thing they commented on was, it's like, listen, everyone gets that training, that first aid training, and no one's doing first aid. Like none of the journalists are doing first aid. They don't put pressure on the wound. They don't, you know. But coming back to it, you're talking about how Joel is holding on. Well, he starts holding on at the very end to Lee more, looking after her, because they go way back. They're tight.
Yeah.
At the very end, I mean, they all kind of go, yeah, that woman's dead. Or I've seen it before. Joel does grab onto her because, of course, she got the shot, but she's also in a state of shock. I'm talking about Jesse. And he does, and then he's like, screw it, you're fine. Or not even you're fine. He's like, he's no longer, he's not responsible for her. He's not going to be responsible for her. If she's going to follow, that's going to be her call. Like that's her transformative moment where she becomes what she wants to become, and is in her dead-eyed stare in the president's office. You're kind of going, it's like the cost, the real price is sinking in. Yeah, maybe
And
it's the cost of those jobs. I don't know.
and the final shot is over the credits where there's a bunch of smiling soldiers. Apparently, a picture she took,
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
trophy
yeah.
there. So
Well, and her trophy shot. It's
yeah,
their
yeah, a
trophy,
double
but
trophy.
also her trophy.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah,
Yeah, not which is in stark contrast to although she literally has a trophy of an Adolf Hitler engraved serving thing with all their booze on it.
yeah, yeah.
Talk about Lee Miller in the Lee movie, but also her trophies are some of these pictures that are about the horror of war, not the, oh, look, the victory, the trophy moment,
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting contrast.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And definitely goes to the meaning of both pieces, which, Jim, to me, boy, we're in a long one, but it is a twofer. We're basically doing a double feature. Shall we talk
Remembrance Day double. Remembrance Day twofer.
Let's talk about the meaning. Jim, with your permission, I'm going to start off.
Yeah.
And we have returned with the social nutrition checklist.
Oh, you did both. It's a double. I've never seen a double before.
I just figured, you know what? It's a double. It shows the scores. It shows everything, but I'll run through it quickly. On my left, screen right, but on my left, over here, we've got Lee. And while if it was an American-made film, it's not, but I'm giving it a check mark under the reframe stamp because it is a woman-produced, woman-written, woman-led show. Easily would have gotten that. Is it a union-made show? I mean, they do have the Producers Guild of America as one of their bugs, but that's a union of managers. Nothing against managers having unions. All workers should have unions. But that is not, when I'm saying union made, I want to see the crew getting union wages. And I'm saying no, although it was shot in Croatia and it was shot in a number of places, so they may have been unionized, but I have not found a way to find out yet in some of these other countries whether or not it was a union.
Yeah.
So I'm saying no for the purposes of our score here. Does it pass the Bechdel test? Oh, it does. There's a lot of conversations of major character women. If they are talking about a guy, they're barely talking about him. That guy is nameless. Does it have a working class perspective? And Jim, this is where we get into a gray area, but for me, I'm going to say no, it doesn't. She really is a petty bourgeois woman hanging out. A lot of she went to Europe, hung out with the bourgeoisie. One of her closest friends is a French noblewoman, played so ably by Marion Cotillard. But yeah, in many respects, it's got more of the trappings of a classic Hollywood movie in the do-gooder, trying to show what's going on, but not from a working class perspective. So that gives it a score of 50%. I know it says 25% in my graphic here.
Yeah.
That's on me. Sorry, folks. Rob up. Hasn't been the first time, won't be the last. All right, over here. Let's see if I can't get that in the screen. Over this side, we have Civil War. Reframe stamp, no. Yes, it's woman-led, or woman lead, but Alex Garland wrote it, directed, bunch of guys producing it. This is, American-made film, but would not get a reframe stamp, or at least I don't believe it would. Is it union-made? Yes, it is. Oh, Shashank Vachari showed up in the chat. Woo!
No, hey.
Whoops. For Shashank and DMG.
Hey, Shashank.
All right. Does it pass the Bechdel test? Hell yeah, it does. Now, here's the tough one. I gave it a check mark, Jim, under working class perspective because, and it's one of the reasons, like, I looked around, I was like, does this actually capture, it felt like it did, but it didn't capture just the, like, 4 workers in a car with a like a high risk, high energy, high adrenaline job, but a job people do for a living. And yeah, finding enough evidence, including the podcast I will link below, that these folks going, yeah, that in so many ways feels like what I do for a living. Also, why are they not filing?
Yes.
But that it, and so I think in that case, and that they are film workers doing, or news workers trying to get a news story, I think that qualifies as a working class perspective. It's remarkably shy. Like it does. It's for film, for I keep saying film, for news people doing their job.
Yeah.
On the road. And so I was like, kind of, okay, yeah, I feel that. There's other things to criticize in this film about its politics, but I'm giving it that. Any other than my screwing up over here on my math, my terrible math, never mind DMG, my terrible math. Anything you'd question or add to my social nutrition checklist?
No, it's nice to see it back. We've done it a couple times now, and it's it's got a double fist attack this time. So that's awesome. Yeah, it's good to see.
So, Jim, this is what I'll do here is, let's bring this. What I'm going to do is I'll start with Lee, and then I'll move into Civil War, and then we'll talk about it. But I want to kind of give a larger sort of comment on it first to help frame our conversation as opposed regarding the politics, the meaning of these pieces. I'm going to start with the easier one, which is Lee. I mean, it is a straightforward, not super jingoistic, which is always nice to see, but it's otherwise a pretty straightforward narrative about, the Holocaust was a thing and it was terrible. Women then and now have to fight sexism in the workplace. An interesting view of how sexism was playing out in the 40s, in war, how some of it was culturally bound, how she couldn't, become a war correspondent because she was through the British system, but because she was an American, click. And then how many soldiers, like, no women allowed, no, which I think is really cool and really important, and important for a war movie, Jim, to show, at least from one perspective, a woman's experience in war as part of this propaganda machine. And, Jim, I mentioned it before, I'll say it again. War, it's a feature, not a bug. Sexual violence, feature, not a bug. And this, except for my complaints about the third act, I think it handled it really well. There's an attempted attempted rape in the right at the midpoint, about the midpoint of the film, before she finds her friend Solange. The way she deals with that, and the way the soldiers, like, well, you'd think they'd be grateful, that idea. I'm not sure I was quite buying the little girl in the I think it was Dachau, when she was talking to these women in a group, but that it was even engaged with, so I think the politics, as far as they go, are pretty solid. It's a pretty interesting thing to see, what is different when a woman is behind the camera. And I'm not just talking about Lee Miller behind that camera, but a woman behind the film camera, a woman, not just talking about a woman's story, but about women's experience in war, at least from one perspective. I mean, it may have a working, or it doesn't have a working class perspective. And I think that also shows, like the woman they interview on the base, well, she's a pilot. It is, they all work for Vogue. Although apparently a far more interesting Vogue than I would find now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And Marion Cotillard's character apparently was the French editor of Vogue. I don't know if they mentioned that in the film, or maybe I just missed it.
I don't think they did, but you're right. And Audrey Withers, now there sounds like I want to know more about her. Played ably by Andrea Riseborough. She's like, oh, it was the greatest journalistic experience of my life, working with Lee Miller and in the war. And even she later on said, I was never, she worked for Condé Nast. She was more one of those people you put in, just take charge, whip that thing into shape. Which I also find fascinating. And she acknowledged herself. It's like, I wasn't really that into fashion. But talk about the right woman for the time. And, we see this weird meltdown in the third act, which I think kind of undermines the film in a way, but also because, you know what? Withers couldn't get it printed in England because, of course, censorship. And that never really, it's like, they weren't aware of censors? They didn't know that this was going to happen, but that American Vogue did. Yeah. In June of 1945, under It Happened. Like, that's remarkable. And it's, I don't mean it's ignored in the film, but because they're trying to play one thing up, like, damn, that's a remarkable thing. And given the nature of this film, probably, they're not going to do a big, hey, how is media both manipulating, but also kind of pushing back as well. Like, it's like Teen Vogue now. Like, what the hell? Who would have thought real, like some semblance of actual left-wing analysis would be coming out of Teen Vogue. Yeah. DMG says, I can 100% verify that journalists, TV news people, salaries qualify as working class. Yes, you can. Zing. Exactly, DMG. Thanks for saying that. And that maybe is great. So that's kind of my approach to Lee. There's nothing really radical here other than that talking about sexual violence as a feature of war. But Jim, regarding, let's take a look at Civil War here. Now, its politics are far more, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to say questionable. He worked very hard to kind of strip any of the players of a position. And I kind of get that. But I think then you also strip any conversation of how they got to this point.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And that, I think, it's like kind of, well, then what are you really saying? Mm-hmm. I also think, while it may have a working class perspective, you know, when we're talking about just the core narrative, I mean, it's not it's radical in some ways, but not in a good way. Like, there is nothing, and I think this is a legitimate criticism that's come from journalists, is like, it is only money shots of violence. That seems to be the only thing they're interested in. And I'm not saying that isn't a legitimate criticism, but it's like, in this film, that's it. That's all we get. Nothing, you know, when they're in the refugee camp, you know, there's nothing, like there's no, the reporter never once, he asks in that weird town, which is almost like an allusion to Apocalypse Now, when they, in the Redux,
the French mansion or whatever.
The French plantation that they just kind of stumble on in the mist. You know, I'm surprised they weren't in the fog.
Yeah.
That's the closest the reporter actually gets to asking a question.
Yeah.
You know, of the human beings suffering through this. They drive by some refugees dragging their belongings by the road. No, hey, maybe we'll take a picture of that. Nope. Like, it is single-mindedly about getting the quote of the president. And interestingly enough, the only guy who is obviously alluding to a person and our context. Like, I mean, he's Trumpian in all, he's a Trumpian kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But everyone else kind of gets a weird mush, you know. The uniforms are similar. It's only near the end that you can kind of, oh, that's the Western Forces flag. You can catch little splashes of it. But by then we know, okay, we know who these soldiers are. But earlier on, even the maps the A24 put out, where it's like, well, if you're in the United States of America, doesn't look like it in New York City. You know, you've got this, it's almost like a postmodern pastiche of other civil wars, like as they're bike riding and you see one poor schmuck obviously been shot by a sniper, you know, that makes you think of Sarajevo, you know, all these other terrible situations. But it's not like he's worked so hard to strip it of anything. You know, people are, oh, California and Texas won't, you know, ever get together. And it's like, I think that's his point. He wants to make sure that he's showing no sides. Mm-hmm. But as has been said before, you know, it's like, I think there's a big criticism of the media here in it. I think that's who he's really criticizing. But he's doing the same thing. What you get to do when you strip players and the reason they're there and whose side is who and everything, and you got maybe one evil guy and a hillbilly, you know, an obvious hillbilly working some old stuff, but you can't attribute it to a cause or a religion or anything, then everyone gets to watch the movie and get the message they want. You know, it offends no one. Or, you know, it's like, they're not talking about me, QAnon guy. They're talking about those, even the reference to the Antifa massacre. Well, what's the massacre?
Yeah.
You know, like, you, Garland. You. You know, I think it's back to her existential crisis. You know, what is the second big lesson Lee teaches Jesse? As Jesse's melting down, going, I should have said something. She might have been able to save these guys' lives. Maybe, probably not, but maybe. But, you know, Lee saves her life, maybe, probably. But in the car, when she shits on her, when she crushes her, she's like, we're not, like right out of a Fox commercial, we're here to send it back. We're not here to make decisions. We report it. We don't make decisions. That's for other people. And, you know, coming back to what I was editorializing about before, that's a terrible model. Without context, without any background, how the can we make a decision? You know, so you're just going to send this information stripped of context. Well, I don't know. You guys figure it out. You know, I mean, you, Garland. It's not an unfair. At the same time, it is a reasonable critique of the so-called mainstream media, you know, the corporate media. I mean, but because his analysis is poor, he doesn't take it far enough. There's, you know, something you and I think we've talked offline. I've certainly thought about it more, and I'm like, listen, journalism is under attack. It's like, I don't know. Talking about features, I think there's something about, it's a calling that is part of the false model message cooked into the system that, you know, we're here for democracy and you need us. We're an important part of democracy. I'd much rather a journalist say, listen, I'm a writer. I work for ABC or whoever you work for. And you go, I'm a worker. You know, you have a problem with my coverage. You really should talk to my editor. And the editor will probably say, yeah, you got to talk to senior management and the owner. They're the ones who set the direction. I learned quite quickly what gets published and what doesn't, and how I keep my job and how I don't. I'm a worker here. We don't, I mean, I don't know about you. Like, I don't like going, those damn Ford workers, they're the reason for global warming. No, they're people making a living. They have a job. They do their job. If we're going to do something about global warming, we will have to incorporate those workers into a new thing, but it ain't their fault. I'm not blaming them. But in part because the Ford worker doesn't go, it's like, you know, I'm an important part of, I was called to work on this assembly line. I was called to be an engineer of V8 motors. You know, it's like, no. They don't make that claim of some sort of special purpose. But journalism and journalists need to, because they want to deny that they're all part of a capitalist operation like everything else is. And so Garland does have a real critique of media. I think they're the ones who are being indicted in this film, as far as that goes. Even just the way it works, you know, there she is, she dies, another one pops out of the machine. She trained her replacement. like a weird business continuity case. It's like, well, hey, there's this freelancer who'll keep sending us crazy images from war zones. Thanks, Lee. Oh, right. Lee who?
Yeah.
The business doesn't care, you know? Yeah, I think, and so I think it's a compelling watch. It's an incredibly well-made movie, but there is a message under the message here that I think is both interesting, but also kind of disturbing. And yeah, like it contributes to the disconnectedness that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one of those, it's like those, I don't know, the hats on online. We're so divided. If only we, you know, talked more. And it's like, I don't know if I'd be like, I don't know, go back to 1938 and go tell a German Jew, you just need to have more dialogue with the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't say that because that's f***ing crazy. Well, a lot of this is as crazy. You got Nick Fuentes going, your body, my choice. Ha ha ha. What dialogue are you having with that piece of shit? So Garland isn't really taking anyone on here. And there's a part of me wondering, I mean, he is the guy who, I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy Dread. Like, I mean, in a dark, kind of guilty, I should bathe after I've watched the film way. But I enjoyed that film. I'm talking with the one with Carl Urban.
Mm.
But, and I know he wrote it, but it sounds, all reports, including Carl Urban himself, say he really directed that movie. There was a lot of drama behind the scenes. Like, he was way more involved than Pete Travis, who is apparently banned from the edit room. Yeah. So I think I'm more comfortable in putting the ideas of Dread onto Garland than I would normally do to the guy who just wrote the film, you know, being a director's medium. Yeah. So you look at Dread and its dystopian view of the world, and it's real, almost, I don't know, there's a weird misogyny there. Like, who is the villain there? It's Mama.
Lena Headey.
Lena Headey. Yeah, as Mama, who were described in her backstory, why she's so evil. Sex worker. Her big crime, how we know she's really awful. She bit the dick off of the pimp who damn near literally defaced her. I don't know, like, I mean, seems like a reason. Hey, she didn't kill him. She didn't unalive him. Thinking Pimpy McAsshole should be just grateful he's still alive. The piece of shit.
Yeah.
So, there you go. That's a lot of dump. But that's kind of where I'm part of what I'm thinking about this film. It's still an amazing watch, worthy of seeing it, but it's got a lot of stuff going on there that I think, because he strips everything of context, kind of slips in some weird ideas and allows them to have it both ways, which is, you know, bull.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jim? That's a big rant. I kind of go a lot of places. Maybe we'll start with the easier one first. Lee.
Sure. Lee, just
what's your take on the politics of Lee?
Well, just talking about, well, the whole thing is every movie has a hook, right? Like, why this? Why now? Why should we make it? And yeah, I think you made a good point earlier about a woman centered war movie, you know, where there's a woman behind the camera, about a woman behind the camera, which is a nice bit of parallelism there. But a couple years back,
Also,
there
would
were,
make a great. I don't know why. No man, why Vogue didn't have that picture
yeah,
of
yeah,
Kate Winslet, camera. What's her name? I don't know. Whatever. Moving on.
yeah. But so it's there was that one year that they released, I think maybe it was the same year, maybe anyway, 1917 in Dunkirk. And I think there was very little female representation. And you look down the line,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot. And and if you're looking at the trenches, yeah, there's not a lot of women in the trenches. There's nurses, there's survivors, 1917. There's that woman in the cellar, the French woman that's with a child that's hiding from people. And so, yeah, you don't, it's not super, it's not a, yeah, you just take a look at the cast, and it's mostly white dudes, no women. And so I think with something like this, it is refreshing to see a different perspective of things, and whether it's her intervening in a potential rape or what have you, that those stories existed as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the guys at the front lines and that sort of thing. So, I enjoyed it for that. There is, just quickly, there's every time I hear about her or I see something, I don't know if she was in Ken Burns's documentary, but there was a female war photographer named Dickie Chappelle who went to Vietnam, and she was
another one.
Yeah.
Why is there not a movie about her?
Super interesting woman. She died. The guy in front of her tripped a landmine, and she got some shrapnel in the neck and died immediately on the battlefield.
Sounds like she's also kind of super right wing. Really believed in
does
the
it? Yeah.
mission. Yeah.
But still, like, undeniably an interesting woman. I don't, for the life of me, I don't know why a movie hasn't been made of her yet. Maybe there has been. I haven't been able to find it. Maybe it's on Tubi. It's a quick 62 minutes, but it's. Yeah, that's another sort of a potential story, and again, for the life of me, it like it writes itself, and obviously you have to find why you're writing it, right? The theme and the meaning and everything. I think she might have also been linked with Robert Capa at some point, the other another famous war photographer. But yeah. Go at it. I'm throwing that idea out there. Somebody deal with it. But and in terms of casting, it's just a meaty role for you can see, and she was a little bit wacky. You could see maybe a Kate McKinnon in it or something like that. But
just come back to Lee. It's like,
yeah, no. Well, you got to talk about Dread for 5 minutes.
You're absolutely right.
Anyway,
although
so
I think it was relevant to my rant, but you're absolutely right.
But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Dickie Chappelle, go for it, Hollywood. In terms of Civil War, I know I'm gonna sound like a bit of a not a deep thinker on this one. I didn't mind the. I didn't want any of that Star Wars scroll at the start where it explains like the warring factions and how it was created. I think you'd need a lot of exposition for something like that. I think you could really sort of drag down a movie. I think what Garland wanted to do is just look at the 2 or 3 days in the lives of these people. So that, I know a lot of people talked about it. It didn't bug me as much as it did some. The other thing is too that Texas and California would never join forces. They're totally different states. Well, look at Clinton's victory map is quite a lot different than the victory maps that we see today. So things change over time. We're probably looking about the Lee Smith in Civil War, probably in her 40s, I would think. Probably got famous in her 20s. So this has been a country sort of dissolving over a 20-year period or so. So things change in that time, and who knows what's gone on. But yeah, that particular thing, I could overlook that, I think. I agree with you. Yeah. Maybe he was looking to, not make it too controversial and try to smooth out everything, smooth out a movie about a civil war with
So you
everyone.
want to say something strong about war
Yeah.
and civil war and American politics by removing all politics and all context.
I mean,
People will know.
yeah, but I think it was about the immediacy of those few days. That would be my sort of argument for that. Yeah, and if you're following it on their level, just in that van, I can see that's sort of what he was going for. But yeah. Anyway, I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed it the second time watching it a little bit better.
It is compelling.
Actually.
Like
it's super compelling. Yeah,
it's a solid flick. Like,
and the cast is freaking great.
Yeah, I think some of the criticisms of it, Jim, were like, is lazy the right word? Yeah. You know what?
Maybe didn't do the work.
It is bugging journalists. I mean, there's always the pedantic, well, that wouldn't happen that way. And it's like, it's not here. I'm trying to predict the future. He's saying something else.
Yeah.
About America. And even my rant is more how he undermines it. Don't want to upset anyone. It's like, what are you doing?
The other interesting thing, I just wanted to, before I totally forget, which is completely possible, I was looking back at, so Lee based on real life. I was thinking about other movies in this mini genre, The Bang Bang Club, about the 4 journalists photojournalists in South Africa.
Yeah.
The Marie Colvin one that Rosamund Pike did. There's Salvador, if you remember that one.
I do.
Loosely based, I think, on...
Is that James Woods?
Yeah, it was an Oliver Stone, James Woods, Jim Belushi. And I think that was technically fiction, but this is a genre in which most of the source material is nonfiction, and Civil War is obviously fiction. And that's kind of an interesting thing. And you do see that in, say, The Newsroom or The West Wing, or, these kinds of allusions to things like this, global politics and war and that kind of thing, in a TV setting. But you don't often see it with movies where you have a fictional photojournalist. And that's kind of an interesting, I'm not saying it makes it stronger or weaker. I'm just saying it's kind of an interesting aspect of the movie.
And coming back to it, there are other aspects of war, especially as a film genre, that can be explored. Which reminds me, the other critique I'd have of this film, of course he'd say it's anti-war. Once again, Jim, another great pro-war movie, because he's so good with violence and he makes it look